Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya studios. A historic summit is about to take place in Anchorage, Alaska. US President Donald Trump will hold talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin to discuss an end to the war in Ukraine. It's been 10 years since Putin has visited the US and the first time the two leaders have met on American soil. Over the next 40 minutes, we'll look ahead to the upcoming meeting with all the latest expert analysis on a day many are calling Europe's biggest moment since World War II. It's been called a high-stakes summit, and today the US and Russian presidents will meet face-to-face for the first time since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It's all to play for as self-styled peacemaker and deal-maker Donald Trump attempts to mend rifts and bring about an end to the war. Trump's told reporters Putin is not going to mess around with him, whilst Putin has praised the US for making a sincere effort. All eyes will be on the US military base Almendorf-Richardson in Anchorage, Alaska, as two of the world's most powerful leaders sit down for the first time since President Trump returned to office. Here is what he had to say ahead of this summit.
I think that President Putin would like to see a deal. I think if I weren't president, he would take over all of Ukraine. It's a war that should have never happened. If I weren't president, in my opinion, he would much rather take over all of Ukraine. But I am president, and he's not going to mess around with me.
We can now go live to Anchorage in Alaska to speak to our correspondent, Tony Waterman. Tony, President Donald Trump, of course, has boarded Air Force One. He's heading to meet Putin in Alaska. What is the atmosphere like in Anchorage ahead of this much anticipated meeting?
Well, as you'd imagine, there is a massive international media presence here in Anchorage. People literally coming from all corners of the world to cover this summit, perhaps a reflection of just how important this is going to be and the global reverberations that this meeting could have. But when you go into downtown Anchorage, and I can't stress enough to you that this is the height of the summer tourism here in Alaska, when you go downtown, you see a mix of Americans from the lower 48 states, as they're known as, and the sentiment is a bit mixed. Some people saying, oh, great, my two favorite dictators are going to be here in Alaska. Other people just don't want to get involved in it. But it is business as usual by and large. Alaska has this long history, not just with Russia. Don't forget that the U.S. purchased Alaska from Russia back in 1867, and it didn't become a U.S. state until 1959. But it also has been a location where we have seen these types of high-level summits taking place in the past. It is taking place, as you mentioned, between Trump and Putin at the Almendorf-Richardson Air Force Base, which is right here behind me. This is going to be a one-on-one meeting behind closed doors with just the interpreter, something that is not particularly usual for these types of discussions, especially when the stakes are so incredibly high. To not even have a note taker in the room to kind of log what is discussed is unusual, but this is the way that Trump likes to operate. He sees a lot of value in these face-to-face meetings and feeling people out, and he says he can feel Putin out in just a couple of minutes after sitting down with him later this morning.
And Tony, the teams accompanying President Trump and Vladimir Putin have been revealed for, as you called it, this high-stakes summit that's about to happen. What more do we know about these political and economic senior officials, or heavyweights, as people call them?
Well, it's very interesting because normally when there are these types of diplomatic situations, these meetings that take place, these summits, you don't normally bring with you top economic advisors. And we are seeing that take place for both of these delegations when they're essentially bringing businessmen to this meeting. And that is because it is becoming increasingly clear that any sort of ceasefire and eventual peace deal is going to have a business component to it. If you look at the map right now, Russia controls about a fifth of Ukrainian territory. So it also has been increasing its attacks, increasing potentially in the future the land that it would start to occupy. So for Russia to come to the negotiating table, it is believed at this point that there needs to be economic incentives for him to move forward with a ceasefire. So according to reports, the United States is readying a package that would include economic incentives, things like perhaps allowing Russia to develop natural resources here in Alaska, particularly in the Bering Strait, which is that very narrow strip of water that separates Russia from Alaska, just 88 kilometers between the two countries, but also allowing them to start mining those rare earth materials inside of Ukraine in the territory that it has already claimed and is occupying. Ukraine has a vast wealth of minerals, and this is something that Washington, of course, the United States has made its own deal with Ukraine on this, but it's something that Washington and Ukraine, or rather Russia, see as a potential source of business in the future. So we're starting to really see that this is not just about diplomacy. This is not just about ending a war. This is about setting a path forward for deeper economic integration, potentially, between the United States, Ukraine, and Russia. And when you start to get that type of economic integration, where businesses are partnering with each other on these very lucrative projects, in the future, you could see the situation where it becomes much more difficult to perhaps impose sanctions if there's bad behaviors, or certainly to kind of break those business ties. This is going to deepen, potentially, the relationship between all of these countries.
Tony Waterman in Anchorage, Alaska, thank you so much for joining us. I'm now joined by John Cavalage, a senior editor for outcome modelling analysis at Issue Insight. John, thank you so much for joining us. So the day has arrived and Donald Trump has told reporters that something is going to come of his meeting with Vladimir Putin. And my question, John, is he right to be so optimistic?
Well, today there are a number of constituencies. There's a group that never wanted this gathering to take place. There's another group that hopes that both President Putin and President Trump's aircraft run out of fuel and they have to turn around. And then there's a third group that wants the event to take place, wants President Trump to not hear what he wants to hear and dramatically walk out of the meeting, get back on Air Force One and return to Washington. So there is a sizable constituency that wants failure, because they feel that success will be defined not to Ukraine's advantage. And what we expect to have happen is a combination of today and tomorrow. If you look at the delegations, as your setup piece talked about, you see that there is a heaviness on those commercial, economic, financial. And that's deliberate from both sides, saying that, yes, the Ukraine-Russia war is important, but it's not as important as President Trump feels the bilateral relationship is between the U.S. and Russia.
So, John, I guess you just touched on the economic delegations going there from both the US and Russia. We know Vladimir Putin is bringing a lot of business people to the summit in Alaska. Is Vladimir Putin at all interested in ending the war with Ukraine? Or is he interested, as our reporter said earlier, Tony Waterman, the deeper ties with the US and the economic deals?
Ideally, President Putin wants both of them. There's always been this unnecessary debate and continuing discussion amongst heads of state, heads of government within the European Union, within NATO, other countries supporting Ukraine, which is they will always say, look, President Putin still wants Ukraine. True. But you have to then look at what does he have the capacity to get? And he doesn't have the capacity to conquer, to take over Ukraine, as he tried to do beginning on the 24th of February, 2022. And so he is looking at the U.S. relationship as very important. However, ending in some way what's happening in Ukraine is incredibly important to him because that is weighing on their economy. The economy is not crashing, as some analysts and pundits and politicians would like to say. It's in a sort of a slow burn, but it still has a lot of capacity. The Russian Federation economy has the capacity to inflict a lot of damage on Ukraine. But it comes with a cost. So President Putin, if he can find a way, whether it's accepting President Trump's ceasefire and then engaging in some way, he's prepared to do it, and I think he wants to do it. A lot of this has to do with performance and has to do with optics in terms of who looks like they're retreating, and no one wants to look like they're retreating.
And John, President Trump has said territorial swaps will be discussed, but he's got to let Ukraine make that decision. I apologize for that. Could Zelensky give up territory to reach a ceasefire deal?
He could, and Ukraine is likely to have to do that. It's unfair, it's wrong, but you have to look at military realities, economic realities, and there isn't much of a setup piece where you can say that Russia's going to extract itself from the roughly 20% of Ukraine that it's occupied. And you need to look at the real estate. The real estate has not changed all that much in 2+ years. Russia has pretty much held on to what it had from 2014 and then what it gained from 2022. It did lose a good amount in the northern areas and around Kyiv, but they're holding, and they're not likely to give that back. Now, one option under discussion, it hasn't been public, but one option under discussion, and again, painful for Ukraine, it has to do with redrawing the current map of Ukraine for the borders of Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, where the Russians control in 3 of the 4, about 70% or so. So one way for Ukraine to alter this a bit, where Russia says, look, we want all 4 of those oblasts, Ukraine says, well, we're going to push those. We're going to shrink them. Therefore, it's a little less territory that Ukraine's going to give up. Again, not a great solution. There are no great solutions with this, but eventually, Ukraine's likely going to have to give some territory. We're now into what had been a war of real estate. It's now a war of semantics, whether it's refusal to recognize, de jure, temporary, whatever the case is going to be. But where Ukraine is getting pushed to is sign whatever you need to sign and just stop the killing. And then what's going to happen is what's going to happen. The actuarial tables, President Putin isn't going to be there forever. President Zelensky's not going to be there forever. President Trump's not going to be there forever. So sign what you need to sign, because a peace treaty between the two countries is going to take decades, if it ever.
John, can I just ask you a question extremely quickly, just because we are short on time? But you just said to me, redrawing the map, and also that must be extremely unnerving for the European leaders. They obviously on the edge as they wait for the outcome of the summit, and if Trump will give Ukraine a fair deal. But redrawing of the map wouldn't be good for Europe.
No, and I somewhat didn't answer part of your question, which was, is President Trump going to be talking about land, talking about real estate, and he's going to be talking about it. He may not, quote, make a deal for it, but if he signs off on it, Europe pretty much is going to have to go along. And you're right, European Union, which wants Ukraine as a member, NATO members, which some of them want Ukraine as a member, they're not going to be happy because it's rewarding the aggressor. It's rewarding the one who attacked. Sometimes, though, using biblical, David doesn't defeat Goliath. And in this particular case, it's just unlikely, given the economic and military realities that is Russia, that they're going to extract themselves from the 20% of Ukraine, pay reparations, promise all sorts of, promise that they won't invade again, et cetera, et cetera. Right now, the focus really needs to be on stopping the killing, because NATO and the European Union are not going to step up with committing troops and 50, 60, 70 billion dollars a year, particularly without the U.S. backstopping them. And President Trump isn't really interested in doing that.
John Cavalage, Senior Editor for Outcome Modelling Analysis at Issue Insight. Thank you so much for your thoughts. Now, one notable person missing from today's proceedings is Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. Earlier in the week, President Trump spoke to Zelensky alongside European leaders about Ukraine's security guarantees. Despite today's talks, there's been no let-up in the fighting. Overnight, Ukraine attacked Russia's Kursk region, killing 1 and injuring 10. Russia's defense ministry say they intercepted 5 Ukrainian drones across multiple regions, including an oil refinery. Meanwhile, a petrol station in the Sumy region in northeastern Ukraine was hit by a Russian attack. I'm now joined by Professor Dmitry Novikov from the School of International Affairs at HSE in Moscow. Thank you, Professor, for joining us this evening. So we have seen protests in Ukraine ahead of this summit, but how are people in Moscow feeling about Trump and Putin meeting on the global stage?
Well, of course, we look at it pretty positively, because, of course, in Russia, we do have some kind of feeling or that this war is close to an end, and that the Russian government would be able to end this war more or less on the conditions they declared from the very beginning. At least that is the feeling we have, judging from what Trump was saying recently, and generally, of course, the very facts that the American president and the Russian president meet each other is a sign that Russia is breaking some kind of isolation which existed after 2022, after the beginning of the military campaign in Ukraine.
So I just want to say it almost sounds a little bit victorious in Moscow right now, but who has more leverage as we head into today's summit? As Trump welcomes Putin on American soil despite Russia invading a sovereign country and making nuclear threats, who has the best chance of making a deal? Is it Putin who has more power, or is it Donald Trump?
I think that both of them will try to insist, disregarding what will be the result of this summit, that this summit was victorious for them. Because from Trump's perspective, the key idea is just to end the conflict. Actually, he demonstrates that he is not so much interested in the exit results, the status of Ukraine, and so on, so on, so on. But he wants to demonstrate his ability to fulfill his obligations, which he declared during the presidential campaign and even earlier. For Putin, the most important thing is to demonstrate to the Russian people that he's victorious, and he has a strong chance to do it. We see that the military campaign in Ukraine stuck to some extent, and that even despite Russian troops have advantage on the front line, they move pretty slowly. What means that there is very small chance that Russian troops could make a strong progress. From this perspective, ending war at this stage, demonstrating that Russia fulfilled its declarations, which the Russian government made in the beginning of war, well, it's a good chance for a comfortable exit from this conflict, where Putin could say that he's victorious side, that Russia is a strong power, and that most of the targets he pursued during this conflict are fulfilled.
So, Dmitry, I just want to ask you if Vladimir Putin will be willing to make some concessions and give up occupied Ukrainian territories in order for Russia to have a partnership with the US and Europe in the future. Because as you said to me, it appears like Russia is going to get everything it wanted from the beginning of the war. Will Russia give up anything to bring peace?
I don't think that his position is that he's going to sacrifice anything substantial, let's put it like that. Definitely, he will not give back any territories which are already occupied by Russian troops. Even if Trump administration would say that it will bring US-Russia relations to a better condition and so on, so on, so on. First of all, there is a very high level of distrust in Moscow. And I think that the Russian government do not believe in a long-range perspective of good relations with the United States of America. Still, they consider the United States as a potential foe and consider that relations are still substantially is a confrontation, not a partnership. Secondly, it is very, very vulnerable domestically because Russia sacrificed quite a lot of people during this conflict, and just giving back any territories would weaken positions of Vladimir Putin inside the country. So potential concessions which are possible are rather about the status of Ukraine. We remember that that Russia insists that Ukraine should be neutral, non-bloc, that military potential of Ukraine should be limited. Here, I think there is some kind of gray area where both sides can bargain and where Russia can make some concessions.
Professor Dmitry Novikov from the School of International Affairs at HSE. It was a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for joining me. Let's continue this conversation now with Olena Khomenko, a Ukrainian MP and a member of Committee on Security, Defence and Intelligence. Olena, thank you so much for joining me. You heard what my previous guest just had to say there, and I don't know what your thoughts on that are, especially when it comes to Ukrainian territory. It has been a very discussed topic ahead of this summit between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin.
Thank you for having me. I haven't listened to the whole conversation, but I would like to inform our distinguished audience that as preparations to Alaska summit are underway, we continue to receive reports from across Ukraine of fresh Russian attacks. In Sumy, the central market was hit. In Dnipropetrovsk region, cities and enterprises targeted. In Zaporizhia and Kherson and Donetsk regions, deliberate strikes continue. And this war persists because there is not even a signal from Moscow about ending it. On the every day of these talks, they are still killing, and that says everything. With regards to territories, our constitution defines our territory, and President Zelensky repeatedly stressed that Ukrainians will not agree to give up their land. Any idea to trade territory for peace is unacceptable. Any agreement that compromises our sovereignty is not peace. It is an invitation to further aggressions. The Alaska meeting must reaffirm that Ukraine's borders, recognized internationally in 1991, are not a bargaining chip. This is a position of Ukraine.
And Olena, I was just hearing you talking to me earlier about the continued Russian attacks on Ukraine. And earlier today, ahead of this meeting, President Volodymyr Zelensky said, "We are counting on America." And he also says any deals made without Ukraine are dead decisions. So right now, what are your hopes for this meeting? Do you think Donald Trump is going to stand up for Ukraine and make sure that he ends the killing and he does bring a ceasefire?
As President Zelensky underscored that ceasefire alone is not enough. We need real security. The true security must come with real security guarantees, and the United States should be directly involved in providing them. These securities must be reinforceable, not symbolic, so that Russia cannot regroup and attack again. This also means Russia cannot have a veto over Ukraine's European Union or NATO membership. Otherwise, that would reward aggression and undermine the very idea of European security and stability. And we have no reason to trust Putin's words about peace. His actions show that he does the opposite: more attacks, more occupation, more repression, and in the areas he controls. This is why we need security guarantees, not empty promises. And of course, it is important to have United States involved.
Yes, of course. And Donald Trump is going to discuss security guarantees with Vladimir Putin today. He did mention that on his way to the summit in Alaska on Air Force One. But another thing is Russia wants Ukraine to drop plans for NATO, cut its army, and also accept its territorial gains. And right now, I'm just listening to you, and both Ukraine and Russia sound very far apart on what can actually bring peace to both countries and end this war. Could any of these be compromised on Ukraine's part? And what would that actually mean? So do you think Ukraine could possibly say, right, we're not going to rejoin NATO, freeze its front lines and accept Russian occupation?
Both territories and Ukrainian and aspiration of Ukraine to join NATO and the EU are enshrined in our constitution. So this is not something Ukraine is ready to give up on. And in recent days, President Zelensky held what he described as long, useful, and positive conversation with President Trump, as well as European leaders. They coordinated positions to ensure a united front going into the Alaska meeting, and they coordinated positions to ensure that stopping the killing must be immediate, and diplomacy on Ukraine and Europe must happen with Ukraine and Europe, and security must come with strong guarantees. This unity between Ukraine, the European Union, and United States is our greatest leverage against Russian aggression. So we are not ready to give up on land, and we're not ready to give up on NATO membership and EU membership.
And Alina, I just want to ask you that Donald Trump has really tempered expectations for any deal being made during this summit with Vladimir Putin. But he has said the second summit where Putin meets Zelensky is going to be the most crucial one to come. Now, do you think that that second summit will actually happen and we'll see Zelensky meet Vladimir Putin alongside Donald Trump? Or do you think that that is unlikely at this stage?
We will see. We will see the results of this first summit, but there are 5 principles agreed with our partners. So there should be Ukraine's full participation. There should be an immediate ceasefire. There should be robust security guarantees with United States involvement and no Russian veto on our Euro-Atlantic future and coupling negotiations with increased pressure. We need to sustain sanctions. We need to keep pressuring Russia so that they will agree on these terms.
Olena Khomenko, Ukrainian MP and member of Committee on Security, Defence and Intelligence. Thank you for your insights and joining the show. As well as discussing the ongoing war, today's discussions could also include a nuclear arms deal between Russia and the US. Putin has told senior Kremlin officials broader peace could be achieved if Russia reached an agreement over strategic offensive weapons. The United States and Russia previously agreed to limit their nuclear arms under the New START treaty in 2011. However, this treaty is actually due to expire in February 2026. We can now go live to Moscow to speak to Alexander Kuznetsov, Deputy Director of the Institute for Forecasting and Political Resolution of Conflict Situations. Alexander, absolute pleasure to have you on the show. I appreciate you taking the time. Russian state media is claiming that Donald Trump is going to meet Vladimir Putin on his plane when he lands in Alaska, and that the meeting could last around 7 hours. Is a breakthrough actually likely at the end of this summit?
I think that many questions were discussed on this summit of Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. And of course, this was a Ukrainian issue. And also, of course, the issue of nuclear disarmament and of the treaty of the long and medium range missiles, as you mentioned, because America is preoccupied with this issue, and I think that American administration would like to renew this treaty and in prospect to include the Chinese People Republic also in this treaty, because the nuclear potential of Russia and China prevails of the nuclear potential of the United States of America now. And also I think that the issues of the Russian-American relations in economic sphere also were touched on this summit. We have read some speculations about, particularly about the possible renewal of the Russian natural gas to Europe through the Northern Stream pipeline, if US will be interested in this project.
So,
and also I think the issue of the Middle East.
I don't know if you can hear me, but I just wanted to speak to you a little bit more about why President Putin has been talking about a new nuclear weapons treaty with the US ahead of this meeting with President Donald Trump today. Why has nuclear been featuring so high up?
I think that the new nuclear treaty is one of the most important issues now to make the situation in this sphere less dangerous and to exclude any possibilities of the nuclear war, the nuclear conflict between two sides. But in the previous 20 years, United States often violated its obligations and the many treaties on this issue. And there were many violations, there were many breaches of previous treaties, so we need to make a revision of all the agreements and treaties in on this problem, I think.
Alexandra Kunetsov, Deputy Director of the Institute for Forecasting and Political Resolution of Conflict Situations in Moscow. Thank you for joining us. While Europe has felt anxious about the upcoming US-Russia summit, the Chinese Foreign Ministry has said it's glad Beijing has long called for a political resolution to the crisis. The possible thaw between Moscow and Washington comes at a time when Beijing is also attempting to mend its relationship with the White House. Camille Nedelec explains.
Officially, China's stance on the Ukraine war reflects the country's trademark caution, calling for diplomacy and dialogue, and rebuking the US for not doing the same.
We urge the US to stop shifting blame on the Ukraine issue or creating confrontation and instead play a more constructive role in promoting ceasefire and peace talks.
Unofficially, China reportedly wants Russia to keep Washington busy. This summit is likely to be closely watched in Beijing. If successful, it could be a blueprint on how to get Trump on side. As the two countries have recalibrated their relationship, Washington has not hesitated to make a long list of demands. Among them, the US wants China to stop importing sanctioned Russian and Iranian oil. US President Donald Trump has said that revenue generated from Russian oil sales is helping to fund Russia's war machine. India faces tariffs of up to 50% in the coming weeks over its oil purchases, and China could be next.
Do you have any similar plans to enact more tariffs on China as it relates to their purchases?
Could happen. Depends on how we do. Could happen.
But Beijing has long maintained what China does in China is none of Washington's business. And a move like that would sour relations as the two sides try to broker a permanent trade truce after the temporary deal was extended earlier this week. Meanwhile, the relationship between Russian President Vladimir Putin and President Xi is strong, with Putin due to visit China in just a few weeks. Camille Nedelec, Al Arabiya English.
A reminder of our top story. A historic summit is about to take place in Anchorage, Alaska. US President Donald Trump will hold talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin to discuss an end to the war in Ukraine. It's been 10 years since Putin has visited the US and the first time the two leaders have met on American soil. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also follow us on X. The rail deal with Tom Burgess-Watson is coming up next. Plus, we'll be back in just a couple of hours' time with the best of this week's W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you for joining us.